My brother accidentally sent a text to our entire family chat. It was screenshots. In them, his fiancée bragged to her friends about manipulating my parents and securing the bag by stealing my inheritance. The family fell silent. My war was already won. My story doesn't begin with a bang, but with the quiet turning of a page in a lawyer's office 5 years ago. My name is Sloane, and at 27, I am what you might call the family's bedrock. It's not a title I asked for, but one I earned through a lifetime of quiet competence. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, are the heart of our town, their hands perpetually dusted with flour from the Hearthstone Bakery, the business they built from nothing. They taught me the value of waking before the sun and the steady rhythm of hard work. They also taught my younger brother Preston that his smile was currency enough. From the very beginning, Preston was the golden child. It was an unspoken, universally accepted truth in our home. His minor triumphs in school were met with praise worthy of a Nobel laureate, while his frequent missteps, a failed class, a dented car fender, were smoothed over with a gentle wave of my parents' checkbook and a chorus of excuses. He was charming, effervescent, and effortlessly occupied the center of our family's universe. Honestly, I never minded. I found a strange sort of comfort in the shadows, building a life on my own terms, content to be the reliable one, the responsible one, the utterly boring older sister who managed her finances and never caused any trouble. If Preston needed to be the star, he could have the spotlight. It never seemed to matter. Not until my world tilted on its axis. It all changed with my grandfather's will. He and I had been close, our bond forged over silent games of chess in his sunlit study and long conversations where he was the only one who asked about my dreams, not just my grades. When he passed, the grief was a physical weight. At the reading of his will, after the expected bequeathals, the lawyer cleared his throat and addressed me directly. My grandfather had left me an incentive trust fund, a considerable sum of money with strict, unbendable covenants designed to protect me from myself and others. It wasn't a windfall I could waste on whims. The terms were clear. I could not access a single penny until my 30th birthday. Even then, its use was restricted to specific, life-altering investments. It was for a down payment on a home, seed money for a business, or funding for higher education. It wasn't just money. It was a legacy of his belief in my future, a future I had been meticulously planning in spreadsheets and notebooks for years. He saw the quiet ambition I rarely showed anyone else. For years, the trust was just that, a quiet promise. It was a line item on a quarterly statement from a financial institution, a password-protected account I rarely checked. I had my own career, my own savings, painstakingly set aside from each paycheck. The money was a safety net, a dream incubator for the small marketing firm I planned to launch. It was my secret, a foundation for the life I intended to build far away from the shadow of the golden boy. I never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined that this carefully constructed gift, this symbol of my grandfather's faith in me, would one day become a weapon pointed directly at my heart. The first tremor that signaled the impending earthquake in my life arrived on a Sunday evening. The air in my parents' house was thick with the comforting smell of roast chicken and the less comforting scent of my mother's nervous hospitality. Preston had recently gotten engaged to Cassandra, or Cassie, as she insisted everyone call her with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Cassie was a whirlwind of practiced charm and expensive perfume, a stark contrast to the homespun warmth of the Hearthstone Bakery. Her family's wealth was a silent, ever-present guest at our humble table, and she had a way of making you feel both utterly captivated and vaguely assessed, as if she were appraising your value. We were finishing dessert when she turned that dazzling, high-wattage smile on me. "Sloane, darling," she began, her voice as smooth and sweet as the buttercream on her fork. "Preston told me all about your little nest egg from your grandfather. How absolutely lovely! Whatever are you planning to do with all that money when you can finally get your hands on it?" The question hung in the air, a baited hook disguised as casual curiosity. It was a flagrant breach of the unspoken financial privacy our family had always maintained. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. My plans for that money were mine, private, meticulously crafted, and precious. I mumbled something non-committal about maybe buying an apartment or finally starting that business I'd been dreaming of. I laughed, a short, nervous sound, hoping to deflect the sheer audacity of the question. Cassie did not laugh. Her smile remained perfectly in place, but her eyes, cool and calculating, stayed fixed on me. They were expectant. "That's wonderful," she purred, placing her fork down with delicate precision. "You know, Preston and I are just starting our life together. A little help with the wedding, or perhaps a down payment on a proper house. It would be such a blessing for the whole family." The room fell silent. Preston chuckled, a jerky, uncomfortable sound that betrayed his unease. My father shifted in his dining chair, the slight scrape of wood on the floor sounding like a thunderclap. My mother, ever the diplomat, rushed to fill the void. "Well, that money is Sloane's, and it's not for us to discuss," she said, her voice a little too bright. She quickly changed the subject to the wedding venue, and the moment seemed to pass. But it hadn't passed. The conversation moved on, but the feeling lingered, a toxic residue clinging to the air. Cassie had done more than ask an inappropriate question. She had staked a claim. She had publicly declared my future, my grandfather's legacy, as a resource available for her consumption. It was a masterful, subtle power play, executed under the guise of sweet-natured innocence. That night, as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It wasn't just Cassie's entitlement that worried me. It was the reactions of my family. Preston's weak laugh, my father's silence, my mother's hasty deflection. They weren't defending a boundary. They were managing a problem. And the problem was me. Cassie had planted a seed of entitlement in the fertile soil of my family's dynamic, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they were all about to start watering it. Then the whispers began. Cassie was a master of the art, her words always strategically placed and framed as loving inquiry. At a family barbecue, I overheard her sighing to my aunt. "It's just so incredible that Sloane has that kind of security," she said, her voice dripping with faux admiration. "It's just so rare to see someone in a position to truly lift up their entire family, you know." The implication was clear. My security was a communal asset, and I was failing to distribute it properly. At first, I tried to ignore it. I'd change the subject with a forced brightness, laughing off her comments as if they were harmless jokes. But Cassie was persistent. She was an artist of passive aggression, framing her relentless desire not as greed, but as a test of my familial devotion. The narrative she was weaving was insidious and brilliant in its simplicity. My responsible planning was being painted as selfishness. My future dreams were an indulgence. My grandfather's gift was not a personal legacy, but a communal resource I was hoarding out of spite. The most painful part was watching Preston. Initially a conflicted bystander, he was slowly but surely being drawn into her orbit. The logic of entitlement, repeated day in and day out, began to seep into his own worldview. He started making comments, not demanding, but testing the waters, echoing her sentiments. "I mean, you're not using the money right now, Sloane," he'd say casually while we were washing dishes. "I kind of get why Cassie sees it as an option for us." He was parroting her. He wasn't just my brother anymore. He was becoming her mouthpiece. The poison was working. Every time he spoke her words, a small piece of the foundation of my family crumbled. He was defending her perspective, validating her claim on my future. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about loyalty, about respect, about the very definition of our relationships. The word family, which had once meant support and unconditional love, was beginning to feel like a weapon. The four walls of my childhood home, once a sanctuary, were starting to feel like a cage, with Cassie holding the key and my family willingly standing guard. I was being maneuvered into a corner, and the path she was paving for me led only to one place: my complete and total surrender. Hoping to find allies in the two people who were supposed to be my staunchest defenders, I decided to approach my parents. I found them in the bakery after hours, the air thick with the comforting, familiar scent of yeast and sugar. It was a stark contrast to the sour taste of anxiety in my mouth. I laid it all out for them. Cassie's increasingly pointed comments, Preston's parroting of her entitlement, the suffocating feeling of being cornered in my own family. I told them I needed their help, that I needed them to draw a line. Their reaction was not the righteous defense I had foolishly expected. It was a plea for my compliance. "You know, Sloane," my mother began, her hands nervously wringing the front of her flour-dusted apron, "Cassie is just trying to feel like she's part of the family. She comes from a different world, a different way of doing things. She's not trying to be pushy." The word hung in the air between us. Pushy. I hadn't used that word, but my mother had. And in that single, unintentional admission, she revealed that she knew exactly what Cassie was doing. She saw it, she understood it, and she was asking me to endure it. My father, avoiding my gaze by pretending to wipe down an already pristine stainless steel counter, chimed in. "And Preston," he said softly, "he's always had it a bit tougher financially than you, honey." Tougher? The word was so absurd I almost laughed. We grew up under the same roof, with the same opportunities. The only difference was our choices. I had budgeted, saved, and meticulously planned for my future. Preston had spent freely, always confident that the bank of Mom and Dad was open for business, its emergency funds perpetually available to bail him out of his latest poor decision. Their argument was a breathtaking masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. They were reframing my discipline as an unfair advantage and Preston's irresponsibility as a hardship I was obligated to alleviate. They weren't seeing a daughter being harassed, they were seeing their golden boy's desires being thwarted. "I'm not saying you have to do it," my dad concluded, finally looking at me, his eyes full of a weary plea for me to make this all go away. "But maybe just think about it. Sometimes keeping the peace is more important than being right." That was the moment the floor fell out from under me. The moment I realized with a soul-crushing certainty that I was truly, completely alone. They weren't protecting me. They were managing me. My role in this family was not to be their daughter, cherished and defended. It was to be the designated shock absorber, the one expected to sacrifice my own dreams, my own future, for the sake of their comfort and Preston's convenience. My peace didn't matter, only theirs. The thin veneer of subtlety finally shattered during another forced family dinner orchestrated by Cassie. This time, she didn't bother with the sweet veneer or the passive-aggressive sighs. The moment the dinner plates were cleared, she cornered me near the kitchen, her grip on my arm surprisingly firm, her nails digging slightly into my skin. "Sloane," she said, her voice low and sharp, stripped of all its usual sugary charm, "I really think you need to reconsider. Helping Preston and me would be the most meaningful way you could possibly use that money. It's a statement of support for this family. Don't you think it's just a little bit selfish to hoard it when you aren't even using it?" The word selfish struck me with the force of a physical slap. It echoed in the sudden ringing of my ears. I, who had babysat for free, loaned money I couldn't afford to lose, and served as the family's unpaid therapist and fixer my entire life, was being called selfish by this woman. A woman who saw my future, my dreams, my security, my grandfather's legacy as nothing more than her personal shopping spree. "The money is inaccessible until I'm 30, I said. "My plans for it are non-negotiable." Her face transformed in an instant. The charming, polished mask fell away completely, revealing a chilling expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was the face of a predator whose prey had unexpectedly fought back. "I guess I misunderstood what kind of person you are," she hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. She released my arm with a little shove and turned on her heel, walking away. The next day, my phone rang. It was Preston. His call was a textbook non-apology, a pathetic attempt to smooth over the cracks his fiancée had just created. "Cassie's just really stressed with all the wedding planning," he began, his voice strained. "She didn't mean to come across so strong." I waited, knowing what was coming next. And there it was, the inevitable turn. "But, Sloane," he continued, and in his voice I could hear her coaching, her words in his mouth. "She's not wrong. You are in a position to help us, and it wouldn't hurt you to really think about what that means for the family." That was it, the final click of the lock. He was no longer just parroting her ideas. He was endorsing her tactics. He was sanctioning her ambush, her insults, her entitlement. He was her ally. And I was the enemy. The battle lines were no longer blurry or drawn in pencil. They were carved deep into the foundation of our family, etched in permanent, indelible ink. And I was on the other side of them, alone. Feeling isolated and starting to question my own sanity, I made the call I should have made weeks ago. I called my cousin, Chloe. Though technically my cousin, Chloe has always been more of a sister. The one person in our sprawling family who saw the intricate, toxic dynamics with perfect, unnerving clarity. She was my chosen family, the ally I desperately needed. We met at a small, neutral coffee shop, far from the suffocatingly sweet air of the Hearthstone Bakery. As I recounted the events of the past few weeks, the whispers, the mounting pressure, my parents' pathetic plea for peace, I watched her expression shift from deep sympathy to a slow-burning, righteous anger on my behalf. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, her focus absolute. When I finished, my voice hoarse, she leaned across the small table. "Sloane, you are not the crazy one," she said, her voice firm and clear, cutting through the fog of gaslighting I'd been living in. "This is classic manipulation. Cassie is a textbook narcissist, and she has found the perfect ecosystem to thrive in. She is weaponizing this family's history of guilt and Preston's golden voice status directly against you." It was like a blast of fresh, clean air. She gave me language for the chaos. She explained concepts from family systems theory, laying out our family's dysfunction like a schematic. Preston, she explained, was the identified patient, the one whose behavior was the focal point, but who was merely a symptom of a larger problem. My parents were the chief enablers, desperately maintaining a dysfunctional equilibrium. And I, the responsible one, had been cast in the role of the scapegoat, the person meant to carry all the family's unspoken frustrations and anxieties. "They don't want peace, Sloane," Chloe continued, her eyes flashing. "They want the status quo. You, being independent and financially responsible, you disrupt their system. You don't need them in the way Preston does. Cassie, on the other hand, who is demanding resources and attention and creating drama that allows them to swoop in and fix things, fits right into their broken system. Talking to her validated every instinct I had been suppressing. It affirmed that I wasn't selfish or cold or wrong. I was a threat to a system that had run on my compliance for years. "You need to start documenting everything," she advised, her tone shifting from analytical to strategic. "Every text, every manipulative conversation, every passive-aggressive comment. Create a timeline with dates and details. This isn't just a petty family squabble anymore, Sloane. This is a campaign of harassment." She took a final sip of her coffee, her gaze unwavering. "It's time to stop being the family's bedrock, Sloane. A bedrock just gets worn down by the tide. It's time to become your own fortress." Just when I thought the pressure couldn't possibly escalate further, I foolishly walked straight into an ambush disguised as a casual lunch invitation from Preston and Cassie. The moment I sat down in the noisy, crowded restaurant, I knew it was a trap. The air was thick with unspoken agendas. After a few minutes of agonizingly forced small talk about the weather, Cassie leaned in, her voice dripping with a syrupy, false sincerity. Sloane, we've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, her eyes wide and earnest. I steeled myself, my stomach tightening into a knot. What if you gave us half of the trust fund? She said, the words falling from her lips as easily as if she were suggesting we split an appetizer. That way, you'd still have plenty left for your little business plans, and Preston and I could start our life together without all this financial stress. Half. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a request, it was a demand wrapped in the language of reason. I looked over at my brother, searching for any sign of dissent, of sanity. I found none. He was just nodding along, a vacant expression on his face, a puppet on her strings. I calmly, for what felt like the 100th time, reiterated my position. The money was restricted by the terms of the trust. It was inaccessible. The answer was no. That's when Cassie's tone turned venomous. The sweet mask dissolved, and her voice became sharp and accusatory. She launched into a tirade about fairness, about how I was hoarding wealth that could be used to benefit the entire family, how my stubborn refusal was the sole reason for all the tension. She painted me as the villain, the dragon guarding a treasure that rightfully belonged to them. Preston jumped in on cue, his voice pleading and pathetic. Sloane, I see your point, but she's not wrong. This could really change things for us. You're in such a good position to help. It's about family. It was a coordinated attack, a perfectly rehearsed two-front war of guilt and entitlement. The noise of the restaurant around me faded into a dull roar. The walls felt like they were closing in. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. I couldn't breathe. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I pulled a $20 bill from my wallet, threw it on the table to cover my untouched iced tea, and walked out without another word. I left them sitting there, side by side in the booth, with their perfectly crafted script, their shared delusion, and their bottomless, insatiable greed. The war had escalated, and they had just fired a cannonball. A few days after the disastrous lunch, my father called. His voice was laced with a forced, cheerful calm that instantly set my teeth on edge. Sloane, can you come over this evening? Your mother and I need to have a family meeting. The phrase family meeting sent a chill down my spine. In our house, that was code. It didn't mean a democratic discussion. It meant a decision had already been made, and my attendance was merely a formality for my capitulation. Against my better judgment, I went. As I walked through the front door of my childhood home, the familiar scent of cinnamon and sugar from the bakery felt cloying, almost suffocating. And then I saw them. Preston and Cassie sitting side by side on the living room couch, looking smug and composed. They were early. My stomach plummeted. This wasn't a meeting. It was an intervention. My father started with a few agonizing minutes of pleasantries about my job before my mother, unable to contain her anxiety, cut to the chase. Sloane, we've all been feeling a lot of tension lately, she began, her eyes pleading with me to be reasonable, to be the good daughter she needed me to be. We just want to find a way to resolve it for everyone. My dad took his cue, his voice taking on a tone of paternal authority. Sloane, we think it's time to consider giving them a portion of the trust. It doesn't have to be half, like they suggested, but something, a gesture of your support to keep this family together. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. I stared at them, my own parents. They weren't mediators. They weren't neutral. They were Cassie's closing argument. They had summoned me here, into the heart of my own home, to formally pressure me to sacrifice my inheritance, my grandfather's legacy, my future, all to appease a manipulative stranger and her coddled, entitled son. They were willing to trade my security for their quiet life. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room with the force of a slammed door. It tasted like freedom and rebellion. Absolutely not. I looked at each of them in turn, a gallery of disappointment and betrayal. My mother's wounded expression, my father's uncomfortable shame, Preston's petulant frustration, and Cassie's face, which had morphed from a look of pleasant expectation to one of cold, icy rage. "This meeting isn't about family," I said, my voice shaking but clear, finally finding the strength Chloe had told me was there. "It's a shakedown, and I'm done being shaken down." I stood up and walked to the door, leaving a stunned, suffocating silence in my wake. As the front door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoed in the quiet street. It wasn't just the end of a meeting, it was the beginning of a war. My refusal at the family meeting was the declaration of war Cassie had been waiting for. With the pretense of familial negotiation shattered, she launched a full-scale smear campaign. It was immediate, brutal, and a masterclass in manipulation. She started with the extended family, the outer ring of our social circle. She spun a sob story so compelling it could have won an award. In her telling, she was the selfless, loving fiancé, desperately trying to build a future with the man she adored. I was cast as the cruel, cold-hearted older sister, cruelly denying them a helping hand out of pure, unadulterated spite. My phone began to buzz with an incessant stream of texts from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all echoing the same hollow sentiment. "Do the right thing, Sloane. Family is always more important than money." They didn't want context. They didn't want my side of the story. They only wanted to dispense their unearned wisdom and feel righteous. Then she took the campaign public. Vague, passive-aggressive posts began to appear on her social media accounts, perfectly crafted for maximum sympathy and minimum accountability. She lamented the pain of family drama and the difficulty of dealing with selfish relatives who hoard their blessings while others struggle. She never used my name. She didn't have to. The narrative was crystal clear to anyone who knew our family. The comments section became a public tribunal. Strangers and distant relatives passed judgment on a situation they knew absolutely nothing about, offering their condolences to poor, long-suffering Cassie. I was tried and convicted in the court of public opinion by a jury of her followers. The isolation was a physical weight, suffocating me. I felt like a pariah in my own family, my reputation being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by a woman I had known for less than a year. The person who was supposed to love me most, my brother, stood by her side as her willing accomplice. And my parents, the people who should have been my fiercest protectors, were the silent architects of my exile. They stood by and watched it all happen, wringing their hands and telling themselves they were keeping the peace. But the peace they craved was the quiet of my surrender. It was the silence that would follow once I had been bled dry of my resources, my dignity, and my future. And that was a price I was no longer willing to pay. My pain was hardening into resolve. My hurt was calcifying into anger. The fortress Chloe had told me to build was getting its foundation. The final straw wasn't a grand confrontation. It wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic, tear-filled argument. It was a quiet, chilling phone call on a Wednesday afternoon. It was from Chloe, and her voice was tight with a fury that mirrored my own. "Sloane," she said, her voice low and tense, "you need to know. Cassie isn't just spreading rumors anymore. She's digging." Chloe went on to explain that Cassie, frustrated by her lack of progress, had started interrogating other relatives, pressing them for specific details about my financial situation, my job, anything she could get her hands on. She was trying to build a case, to find a weakness, a loophole. But the truly unforgivable act came next. The following day, a colleague of mine, a kind woman named Sarah, pulled me aside at work, her expression deeply concerned. "Hey, this is really weird," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But someone from HR just mentioned a strange call they got yesterday. A woman claiming to be your relative called, asking to verify your salary and employment status for a family financial matter. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had no concrete proof it was Cassie, but who else could it possibly be? The timing, the context, the sheer audacity, it all pointed to her. The sheer violation of it, the attempt to breach the firewall between my personal and professional life, was a line so thoroughly and recklessly crossed there was no coming back. She had brought her war to my place of work, to the life I had built for myself, entirely separate from her and her toxic drama. That night, something inside me shifted. It was a profound, fundamental change, like a tectonic plate grinding into a new position. The hurt, the frustration, the deep, abiding sadness, it all receded. In its place rose a cold, quiet, and utterly unflinching resolve. The emotional victim who had been pleading for her family to see reason was gone. In her place stood a strategist. This was no longer about feelings. Feelings were subjective and could be manipulated. This was about facts, evidence, and consequences. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a pale blue light in my dark apartment. I created a new password-protected folder on my desktop. I named it Project Consequence. The time for defense, for reacting, for hoping they would change was over. It was time to build a case. It was time to go on the offensive. Armed with a new and chilling sense of purpose, my first call the next morning was to a highly recommended attorney specializing in estate law and harassment cases. Her name was Evelyn Reed. I laid out the entire saga in her quiet, book-lined office, from the first mention of the trust found at that Sunday dinner to the call to my employer. Evelyn listened intently, her face impassive, occasionally jotting down a note on a legal pad. "Miss Hayes," she said when I finally finished, her voice calm but firm, "what you're describing goes far beyond a simple family dispute. This is a clear pattern of coercive behavior and targeted harassment. The attempt to access your employment records is particularly egregious and crosses a legal line." She confirmed what I already knew. The trust was ironclad, protected by a spendthrift provision my grandfather had wisely included, making it impervious to creditors or, in this case, greedy future in-laws. No one could touch it. But more importantly, she gave me a legal framework for the emotional torment I'd been enduring. She gave me power. "We can and should issue a cease and desist letter," she advised. "It will put Miss Vance on formal notice that her actions have been documented and will have legal consequences if they continue." Following her advice, I went home and began my karma audit. I compiled every single manipulative text, every guilt-tripping email, and documented every single conversation in a dated spreadsheet. I took screen captures of Cassie's passive-aggressive social media posts and the public comments from our relatives. The Project Consequence file grew, becoming a meticulous and damning record of her campaign of psychological warfare. The process felt clinical, detached, as if I were an investigator building a case against a stranger, not my brother's fiancé. This evidence-based approach was strangely empowering. It stripped away the emotional chaos and replaced it with cold, hard, irrefutable facts. There was no room for interpretation in a timeline of harassing phone calls. There was no denying the intent behind a saved text message. As Evelyn had said during our meeting, "In a he said, she said situation, Miss Hayes, the person with the receipts always wins." And I was building an arsenal of them. I was no longer the family bedrock waiting to be worn down. I was the architect of consequence, and I was just starting to draw up the blueprints. With the Project Consequence file meticulously compiled, Evelyn drafted the cease and desist letter. It was a masterpiece of cold, professional intimidation. It detailed Cassie's escalating actions, from the initial verbal pressure and social media smear campaign to the illegal attempt to access my private information at my workplace. It cited potential legal claims, including defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The letter concluded with a clear, non-negotiable demand: All contact and communication regarding the trust fund, either directly or through third parties, must stop immediately. Any further harassment would result in legal action without further notice. I clicked send on the email to Cassie with my parents and Preston CC'd for maximum effect. The action felt both terrifying and profoundly liberating. I was severing a cord, escalating the conflict to a place from which there was no easy return. I was drawing a line in the sand, not with a stick, but with the full weight of the law. The reaction was immediate. Within a day, Preston called, his voice a sputtering mixture of fury and disbelief. "A legal letter, Sloane? You sent a lawyer after my fiancé? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for us?" My voice, when I answered, was steady and calm, devoid of the emotion he expected. "Preston, I had no choice. Your fiancé has been systematically harassing me for weeks. She crossed an unforgivable line when she tried to involve my job. This is not an attack. This is the consequence of her actions." He didn't see it that way. Of course he didn't. He accused me of being vindictive, of actively trying to ruin their happiness. The call ended with him yelling impotently and me quietly hanging up. Delete. Then came the inevitable call from my mother, her voice laced with pleading and disappointment. "You didn't need to make this a formal legal matter, Sloane," she said, her tone that of a deeply wronged martyr. "This is not how our family solves problems." "I agree, Mom," I replied, my voice still eerily calm. "Our family doesn't solve problems. It ignores them, sweeps them under the rug, and then expects me to pay for the fallout. There's a difference." The line went silent, a long, stunned silence. For the first time, I had not just refused to play my part. I had rewritten the entire script. The letter had done its job. It had created silence, a space where their pressure, their expectations, and their manipulations could no longer reach me. The fortress was built. Now I would see who dared to lay siege. The cease and desist letter worked, but not in the way I had naively expected. Cassie went dark. Her social media, once a constant stream of passive-aggressive digs and curated victimhood, fell completely silent. The calls and texts from my extended family stopped, as if a tap had been turned off. But the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was heavy, charged with unspoken resentment and 1,000 accusations. My parents began to treat me with a frosty, painful civility. Every interaction was strained, every conversation a minefield. Their disappointment was a constant, palpable presence in every room we shared. In their eyes, I had shattered the family's fragile peace by bringing in lawyers and legal threats. They refused to see, or simply couldn't allow themselves to see, that the peace they cherished was a toxic illusion built entirely on the foundation of my submission. I had stopped playing my role as the family scapegoat, and it had thrown their entire universe into disarray. During this period, I poured myself into my work, finding solace in deadlines and projects. I focused on my life outside the toxic bubble of my family. Chloe was my rock, a constant source of support and validation. "Let them stew in it," she said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "You drew a hard boundary, Sloane, a necessary one. Now they have to learn to live on the other side of it." Meanwhile, I continued to quietly organize and update my project consequence file. I knew Cassie. I had seen the look in her eyes. A person with that level of malignant entitlement doesn't just give up. She regroups, she re-strategizes. I suspected she was working behind the scenes, trying to find another angle, another weakness to exploit. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was a tactical retreat. This quiet, tense period was not an end, but an intermission. I spent it preparing for the next act. I was no longer a potential victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a prepared opponent, my case file growing more detailed by the day, patiently waiting for her to make her next move. And I knew with an absolute and chilling certainty that she would. Predators don't change their nature. They just changed their hunting grounds. The implosion, when it finally came, was not the result of a dramatic confrontation or a clever legal maneuver on my part. It arrived on a Tuesday night, delivered not with a bang, but with the quiet buzz of a phone notification. It was a message in the family group chat, a digital space I now viewed as a war zone. It was from Preston. The message was clearly, catastrophically, not meant for us. He had written it to Cassie. "I found the messages you sent to your friends about Sloane," the text read. "Are you serious? You've been bragging about securing the bag this whole time?" Before anyone in the group chat could even process this, a second message from him appeared. It was a series of screenshots. There, in stark, undeniable black and white, was Cassie's unvarnished greed, her true motives laid bare for all to see. "Don't worry," she had written in one message to a friend. "Richard and Eleanor will push Sloane into giving me the money. She's too soft to hold out forever." Another screenshot showed her openly mocking me, her words dripping with condescension. "Sloane is so focused on her little business dreams, she doesn't even realize how selfish she's being. This money should have been split between the family from the start." A final, damning text from Preston to Cassie followed the screenshots, a message that must have been typed in a furious rage. "I can't believe you've been manipulating everyone, including me, just to get your hands on money that isn't even yours. This stops now." A beat of stunned digital silence hung in the air. Then, a new message from a horrified Preston appeared, a desperate attempt to put the genie back in the bottle. "Oh no, this wasn't supposed to go here. I'm so sorry." But it was too late. So much too late. The damage was done. The truth bomb had been detonated, not by me, but by the one person who had been her staunchest defender. The receipts, both literal and figurative, had been delivered to the entire family in a single careless tap of a button. My case file was no longer private. It was now Exhibit A in the court of family opinion. The truth in all its ugly glory was finally out, and there was nowhere for anyone to hide. The family group chat, once a benign space for birthday wishes and barbecue plans, erupted like a volcano. My mother was the first to type, her message stark and stripped of all her usual diplomatic fluff. "Cassandra, what is this? Is this true?" My father followed a split second later, his fury palpable even through the screen. "You told us you were trying to find a peaceful resolution. Were you lying to us this entire time?" Cassie scrambled, her reply a frantic, desperate mess of denial and exclamation points. "These are being taken completely out of context. I was just venting to friends about how stressful everything has been with the wedding. You've all misunderstood." But the evidence was too clear, too damning. No one was buying it. Not this time. The carefully constructed image of the charming, devoted fiancé shattered in an instant, leaving only the ugly, grasping greed beneath. The relatives who had been lecturing me just weeks before were now conspicuously silent, or typing hesitant messages of shock and confusion. The tide had turned, swiftly and brutally. I watched the digital carnage unfold for a moment, a grim sense of vindication washing over me. Then, with a quiet finality, I muted the chat and put my phone down. I didn't need to participate. I didn't need to defend myself. The consequences were unfolding on their own, a beautiful, chaotic chain reaction I had set in motion simply by refusing to break. Later that evening, Preston called. His voice was choked with a shame so thick it was almost tangible. "Sloane, I am so sorry. I was going to confront her privately. I never, ever meant for you to find out like this." His apology was hollow, a worthless currency. "You've been defending her for months, Preston," I said, my voice devoid of the emotion he probably expected. It was flat, clinical. "You stood by and let her do this." "I know," he whispered, his voice cracking. I let her manipulate me. I see that now. I see everything." But his newfound clarity offered me no comfort. Seeing the truth only after it was accidentally plastered across a group chat for the entire family to witness wasn't a moment of enlightenment. It was a moment of profound public humiliation. He hadn't chosen to defend me. He had simply been forced to stop defending her when her lies became indefensible. And there is a world of difference between those two things. His apology wasn't for me. It was for himself. In the days that followed the accidental exposure, Cassie's carefully curated world unraveled with breathtaking speed. Stripped of her primary weapon, manipulation, she was left with nothing but her own transparent greed. Chloe, my ever-loyal source of information, kept me updated on the fallout with a certain grim satisfaction. Cassie tried to do damage control. She called family members individually, spinning new, increasingly desperate lies. She claimed the texts were elaborate inside jokes, that she was the true victim of a massive misunderstanding, that the stress of wedding planning had made her say things she didn't mean. But no one was buying it. The screenshots were irrefutable. Her credibility, once her greatest asset, was completely gone. The wedding plans, which had been the entire premise of her financial crusade against me, fell apart in spectacular fashion. The high-end venue was canceled, the deposit lost, the dream dress was returned. She had built a castle of aspirations on the foundation of my inheritance, and with that foundation removed, the entire structure collapsed into a pile of rubble and debt. The greatest irony was a final karmic twist that Chloe relayed to me. Cassie's own wealthy family, the prestigious background she constantly leveraged for social status, reportedly refused to finance the lavish affair she had envisioned. They had likely assumed, as she and my parents had, that I would be the one to foot the bill. Without my investment, her entire enterprise was bankrupt. She had counted on my compliance to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford on her own. Preston, finally facing the complete, unvarnished picture of her deception, ended the engagement. The golden boy, for the first time in his sheltered and privileged life, was forced to face the direct consequences of his own poor judgment and willful blindness. There was no one left to blame, no one to bail him out. He had hitched his wagon to a falling star, and now he was left standing alone in the wreckage, his hands empty and his future uncertain. The world he knew, one built on smiles and easy outs, had ceased to exist. With Cassie finally and completely excised from our lives, a fragile and profoundly awkward process of rebuilding began. The silence she left behind was deafening, filled with all the things that had been left unsaid, all the truths that had been willfully ignored. My parents, shaken to their core by the undeniable proof of Cassie's duplicity, reached out. My father called first, his voice heavy with a shame I had never heard from him before. He admitted they had mishandled everything, that they had been blinded by their lifelong desire for Preston's happiness, a happiness they now saw was built on a foundation of entitlement. My mother, who had been Cassie's biggest defender, her most powerful enabler, finally offered a real apology, face-to-face over coffee that tasted like ash. "I'm so sorry, Sloane," she said, her eyes welling with tears she didn't try to hide. "I should have believed you. I should have trusted you. I chose to see what I wanted to see, not what was actually there." It wasn't a magic fix. It didn't erase the months of pain, the feeling of betrayal, but it was a start. It was an acknowledgement. And for now, it was enough. Preston began therapy. He called me a week after the breakup, not to apologize again, but to tell me about his first session. He was finally starting to unpack why he was so susceptible to manipulation, why his sense of self-worth was so inextricably tied to his golden boy status. He was, for the first time, beginning to dismantle the role our family had created for him and the one he had so willingly played. I didn't offer him immediate, easy forgiveness. Trust, once so thoroughly broken, is not a shattered plate that can be simply glued back together. It must be remade, piece by painstaking piece. I set firm, clear boundaries. Our relationships, if they were to survive, would have to be rebuilt on a new foundation of brutal honesty and mutual respect, not on the shifting sands of obligation and guilt. This whole ordeal, as painful and exhausting as it was, became my final awakening. The catalyst moment wasn't one single event, but a slow, agonizing burn that finally forced me to see the truth. It forced me to find my voice, to build my fortress, and to understand the real meaning of family. It's not about blood. It's about who stands with you in the fire. 6 months have passed since the implosion. The silence in my life is no longer heavy with tension, but light and clean with a hard-won peace. I am now 28, and my business plan, once dismissed as a little dream, is a detailed multi-page prospectus sitting on my desk, ready for review with potential investors. The trust fund, once a source of bitter conflict, has reverted to its original intended purpose, a quiet promise, a foundation for a future I am building for myself, by myself. I have reconnected with my parents and Preston, but it is on my own terms. The dynamics are fundamentally different. The old roles have been shattered, and we are slowly, awkwardly, learning how to interact as equals. They are learning to see me not as a function, the fixer, the responsible one, the family ATM, but as a person with her own life, her own boundaries, and her own voice. It is a slow, ongoing process, but for the first time, it feels real. I recently heard through Chloe that Cassie has moved to another state, likely in search of a new family system to infiltrate, a new golden boy to latch onto. Her name is rarely mentioned in our family anymore. She is a ghost, a cautionary tale of what happens when entitlement meets an immovable object. The other day, I was looking over my finances and saw the folder on my desktop, Project Consequence. I thought about deleting it, dragging it to the trash to be permanently erased, but I stopped. I decided to keep it. It's not a trophy, it's a reminder, not of the betrayal, but of my own strength. It is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most loving act, for yourself and for others, is to step back and let people face the full, unvarnished consequences of their own choices. For the first time in a very long time, my future feels entirely my own. It is a wide, open road stretching out before me, clear and bright. My story is just beginning, and this time, I am the sole author. I am finally free. Sloane's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound betrayals are the catalyst for our greatest transformations. The moments that feel like endings are often just the beginning of reclaiming our own lives. What do you think? Was Sloane right to involve a lawyer, or should she have tried to keep the peace? I'd love to hear your stories and thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching The Final Awakening. If Sloane's journey resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to The Final Awakening and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story of truth and consequence.